Donald Trump has made threats that I think make World War III more likely to happen. Trump's isolationism will lead to more wars and not less. Donald Trump has threatened to withdraw from the NATO alliance, which keeps most of Europe secure and peaceful. He has said that he would encourage Russia to attack NATO countries in Europe. He has threatened to completely withdraw American troops from South Korea, which are troops that deter North Korea from invading, and he has refused to say whether or not he will defend Taiwan if China invades it. The reason Trump's isolationist foreign policy will likely lead to more wars is because he seemingly won't try to stop expansionist countries from launching wars against their neighbors. While previous American presidents have always been committed to deterring China, North Korea, and Russia from invading their neighbors, Trump and the populist wing of the Republican Party are not as committed to protecting vulnerable countries from being attacked. The people of Europe, South Korea, and Taiwan are not going to survive the next Trump presidency, I don't think, because their peace and their very existence is dependent on US military support. Let's first look at Europe. I fear that Europe will be destroyed by war if Trump is president again. If Trump were to withdraw from NATO, as he has threatened to, 30 European countries would now be more weak and vulnerable as they would no longer have the US military protection that has kept them safe and peaceful for decades. After Trump withdraws from the alliance, Russia would invade NATO member countries in Europe to seize control of those nations by force. Based on what Russia has already done in its invasions of Chechnya, Afghanistan, and Ukraine, this is what Russia would certainly do to the NATO countries. Russia would heavily bomb thousands of schools, hospitals, homes, shopping malls, and apartment blocks all across Europe. Entire cities in Europe would be flattened to rubble. Tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of innocent European civilians would be killed, including many, many children. Tens of millions of Europeans would be displaced from their homes. Once the Russian military gains control of other European countries, it will round up and massacre hundreds of civilians. And Russia would abolish the freedom of speech and democratic elections these nations have, and would bring them under oppressive authoritarian rule where criticism of the government means instant imprisonment. All of this stuff has just happened in Ukraine, and it will happen to the rest of Europe if Trump withdraws America from NATO. NATO is an agreement that the US and Europe have had since 1949, where the US has essentially promised to defend the borders of NATO countries, protect them from being conquered, and fight off any invaders or attackers. Since NATO was formed, the only country that has invaded other European countries is Russia. Russia has invaded 6 countries in Europe since 1949: Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Moldova, Georgia, Chechnya twice, and Ukraine twice. None of these countries were part of NATO when they were invaded, so they didn't have US protection. No NATO member country has ever been invaded. Russia only invades nearby non-NATO countries. The reason why is because Russia is too afraid to start a war with America because it knows that it will be destroyed by the US military. Trump has threatened to and has contemplated the idea of withdrawing the US from NATO. This would mean that the US would no longer be required to defend European countries from Russia. The Russian government has made it clear that they want to expand their borders and desire to conquer countries that were formerly part of or were formerly controlled by Russia. This includes NATO countries that used to endure decades of oppression by Russia. Therefore, if America stops protecting Europe, it will be much easier for Russia to invade and destroy its neighbors. Trump also said that if NATO countries do not spend as much money on their military as they agreed to, he said that he would encourage Russia to do whatever the hell they want to the countries that don't spend enough. So not only will he abandon NATO countries and leave them vulnerable and defenseless, he would encourage Russia to attack them, which would result in thousands of civilians dying. That's not anti-war, that's pro-war. Just for not paying your bills, you deserve to be bombed and slaughtered, I guess. So if you want to reduce the chance of Europe being literally destroyed, I'd say don't let Trump win. Meanwhile, the Democrats have made it clear that they fully support NATO. Additionally, Donald Trump is going to cut off aid to Ukraine, a country that is currently being invaded by the Russian military. Every day, Russia is taking more and more of Ukraine's land, and it regularly bombs Ukrainian houses, apartments, shopping malls, and hospitals, killing civilians. Ukraine desperately needs American weapons in order to defend its people from Russia's attacks. If Biden hadn't been funding Ukraine, the country would have been conquered by Russia, and tens of millions of Ukrainians would be brutally oppressed right now. Russia is still fighting and pushing for more of Ukraine's land. If Trump cuts off aid, the Ukrainians will be too weak to defend themselves, and Russia will rapidly steal much more of Ukraine's land and will probably even be able to defeat and wipe out Ukraine's government entirely. The Ukrainian nation has been able to survive thanks to American aid. If Trump cuts off aid, he will allow that nation to be destroyed and will be handing its territory over to Putin. Populist Republicans think that ending American support for Ukraine and NATO will end the violence and will prevent World War III. But US isolationism will just embolden Russia to conquer the rest of Ukraine, which will lead to increased violence against the Ukrainian people. And it will embolden Russia to start World War III by invading NATO. So Trump's isolationism, I think, could very well destroy Europe. Now, let's look at East Asia, another part of the world that could be destroyed by war if isolationist Republicans are elected to power in America. In this region, America militarily protects the countries of Japan, the Philippines, South Korea, and Taiwan. These countries are regularly threatened by the militaries of China and North Korea, especially Taiwan and South Korea. North Korea claims that South Korea belongs to it. The North regularly threatens to launch a full-scale war against South Korea and destroy the South. For years, the North has been building nuclear weapons, testing nuclear weapons, firing missiles over Japan, and firing missiles into South Korean waters, and making threats to flatten South Korean cities. North Korea invaded South Korea in 1950 and tried to conquer it, but failed because the US military got involved, kicked out the North, and rescued the South. Millions died in that war, and millions more will die if North Korea starts another war on the peninsula. For decades, the North has wanted to conquer the South, but thousands of American troops have been stationed in the South, which deters the North from invading. North Korea does not want war with the US, and so it has not invaded South Korea again, because America has pledged to militarily defend South Korea's existence. However, Donald Trump has threatened to completely withdraw US troops from South Korea, troops that deter the North from invading. If Trump pulls America out of South Korea, the South would literally be all on its own and would be vulnerable to a North Korean invasion, which would result in the destruction of cities, the deaths of hundreds of thousands, and the enslavement of millions in South Korea. While the Democrats are committed to defending South Korea, isolationist Republicans see South Korea as a waste of US money, and they don't see a problem in ending support for the South, even though US support is crucial to the South's survival. If you don't want millions of South Koreans to be shot, bombed, or starved, then I recommend you don't elect an isolationist to power who might decide to ditch South Korea and let it die. South Korea's situation is similar to Taiwan's. For many years, Communist China has been plotting and preparing to invade Taiwan in order to seize full control of it by force. It would likely use Russia's strategy of bombing homes, schools, and hospitals and flattening entire cities to rubble, which would result in the deaths of tens of thousands of Taiwanese civilians. Once China conquers Taiwan, it would carry out mass executions of anti-communists and would abolish all of Taiwan's human rights and freedoms. Since 1949, China has tried many times to attack Taiwan, but the Taiwanese have always been protected militarily by America. For decades, the US has pledged to defend Taiwan and fight off Chinese attempts to invade the island. Thus, Taiwan has remained free and peaceful thanks to American interventionism. That will change if isolationists are elected to power in America. Whenever Donald Trump is asked whether he will defend Taiwan from a Chinese invasion, he refuses to answer the question. Previous American governments have been clear in their strong support for protecting Taiwan from China. Biden himself has said multiple times that the US military would be there to support Taiwan if China invaded. This US interventionism has kept Taiwan safe and peaceful for decades because China doesn't want to invade Taiwan if it means war with America. But if Trump abandons Taiwan, as he has threatened to abandon South Korea and Europe, China would be able to invade and destroy Taiwan without US interference. So, if you don't want Taiwanese civilians to be slaughtered by a communist dictatorship, then maybe vote for the party that will defend Taiwan, unlike the isolationists. I am really concerned that World War III will break out in Europe and East Asia if America goes in a non-interventionist direction under Trump. What's the point of the US being involved in all these regions? Well, it's to prevent the enormous, violent, and brutal death and destruction that would ravage these regions if America abandoned them. Russia, China, and North Korea will violently wipe out entire nations unless America remains committed to defending its allies. And I do not think that Trump is committed to doing that, but the Democrats are. And because of that, I think the Democrats are more likely to prevent World War III, and isolationism is more likely to encourage more war.